Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. That concludes the opening statements, and I'd like to yield myself 5 minutes to ask questions, and then I'll yield to the ranking member, who happens to be you now, right? Good. All right. Ambassador Glassman, to what extent does the diminished U.S. diplomatic presence in Bolivia and Ecuador hinder the U.S.'s ability to support U.S. companies and investors in those countries? And what resources or recourse does U.S. investors have if they encounter difficulties with governments such as Bolivia that have revoked bilateral investment treaties and eschewed participation in international dispute resolution mechanisms?
Well, the quick answer to that is very little. It's a major problem, not just for American investors, but I would say for those countries themselves, because they're the ones who are being denied the kind of prosperity that they should have through a sound rule of law. But I do think that in many ways the U.S. should become much more concerned and engaged in Latin American countries, both those that are not abiding by the rule of law and those that are, who really need encouragement. And I'm sad to say that I don't think we've been doing that.
I would agree with you. And I guess on another front, Ecuador has shown little regard for property rights, particularly intellectual property rights. In fact, this year, USTR again placed Ecuador on the Specialty 301 watch list due to failure to adequately protect U.S. intellectual property. And these anti-innovation policies, they do harm the U.S., but they also harm Ecuador, which is locking her people out of today's knowledge-intensive economy. What tools do we have in our arsenal to encourage Ecuador to adequately respect property rights, both tangible and intangible?
You know, I really think that one of the major tools that we have is the bully pulpit. I mean, the State Department does issue a report every year that covers the economic climate in countries like Ecuador. And my written statement does refer to that. I just want to quote one sentence from it. This is about Ecuador. Frequent changes in Ecuador's tax code make business planning difficult. In general, the legal complexity resulting from the inconsistent application and interpretation of existing laws complicates enforcement of contracts and increases the risks and costs of doing business in Ecuador. We have the means through what the Secretary of State says, what the President might say, to affect the policies of Ecuador. And I think that we should be talking about it.
Mr. Fernandez, to what extent is corruption an impediment to a healthy investment climate? And do you know to what extent does the United States support anti-corruption initiatives in Latin America? And which countries have improved their anti-corruption capabilities as a result of such assistance?
Corruption is an issue in Latin America in a number of countries, and it's an issue for U.S. investors in large part because they are constrained by the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and that's something that will have repercussions back at home. I have found that it differs depending on the country. You look at countries such as Chile, as Uruguay, where you and I would go into court there and feel that we can get a good hearing. In other countries, it's a problem, and it's many countries where what we have tried to do what we tried to do in government was to support transparency efforts, to work with the American Bar Association, to work with others, to support anti-corruption measures. Ultimately, though, we've got to be able to get the support of the local population because they are the ones that ultimately are hurt by corruption. Corruption hurts, for the most part, poor people, people who can't pay. And I think that's part of what we need to do more of over the years. Mr. Chairman, I actually represented Peru when they privatized their phone company 20 years ago, and I'd like to take credit for a little bit of their growth. One of the things that they did is they did away with a lot of the government bureaucracy. Became a lot easier to get permits in Peru in order to do business. The more red tape that you have in these countries, the easier it is for someone to get paid. And so that's something that they did. They also provided a number of guarantees for investors, and they also made very specific statements that they were going to welcome foreign investment. That, I should say, in many cases has not made the ruling presidents quite popular. They've had to buck a lot of political pressure. But overall, if you look at the macro growth in Peru, a lot of it is due to the fact that they made it very clear for the last couple of decades, since they did away with the shining path, that they are going to support foreign investments and that they're going to do anything that they can in order to attract and keep that foreign investment.
Thank you. My time's expired, Mr. Meeks.